Every evening he sat at the controls, feeling the familiar hum of the engines and the gentle rocking of the fuselage. This road to heaven was his element, his second home. He calculated every maneuver instantly, as if he were writing a program. Precision and confidence were his main tools. But today, something inside the runway trembled. The sky seemed too dark. The earth seemed too far away. He turned off the autopilot and his heart began to beat faster. The phone in my pocket was shaking, as if it was vibrating with impatience. The name on the screen is wife. When he answered, she didn't hear the usual warmth in his voice, but restrained anxiety. She didn't even have time to greet him. Instead, there was a pause, heavy and filled with meaning. He listened in silence, feeling his palms become sticky with excitement. Her words cut through the usual rhythm of life. "I need to talk to you seriously." In the taxi, he stared at the lights of the city shimmering in the windows, but the image of the house faded further and further into a haze of doubt. The pictures on the screen were like they were from another life. She in a white dress, the two of them laughing, hugging, and suddenly he saw a boarding pass on the seat with her name and the date of departure to the other side of the country. My heart skipped a beat. The feeling of betrayal turned out to be sharper than any turbulence. He reached out to the phone screen and opened the airline's app. In one click, he booked a ticket, realizing that this time he needed not an autopilot, but a sharp look and a steady hand. He always came home. He will return today to find out the truth. He did not notice how the city was left behind when the plane soared into the night sky. Every heartbeat of the engine echoed in my chest, reminding me that everything that matters is ahead. He didn't know how many minutes were left before his well-deserved rest, but he counted every second, bringing closer the moment when everything would become clear. Arriving in another city, he was greeted by an empty baggage claim counter and the hum of air conditioners in the lobby. His hand convulsively clutched his passport until he saw the same name on the flight board, a living clue that he had not made a mistake in his decision. The taxi sped along the highway through the darkness of the night, and in the rearview mirror, a silhouette flashed like a ghost, the shadow of her image non-existent and at the same time too real. He approached her hotel silently, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The white marble steps, the cold metal door of the electronic lock. Everything spoke of luxury, but inside everything seemed lifeless. He entered the room number and the lock clicked. In the hallway is her suitcase on wheels, neatly packed. On the bedside table is a glass of unfinished wine and crumbs of fruit on a tray. The smell of someone else's perfume is in the air. The room was empty. A light breeze from the open balcony ruffled the curtains, as if inviting him to join in the conversation. He went to the bed and saw on the blanket a printout of the flight ticket back. Her ticket home. Fate played a cat-and-mouse game with him. She left, but she was already planning a return. He still didn't know how much truth was hidden behind this ticket, but any truth now was better than this lingering expectation. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring into space. Her voice replayed in my head. "I need to talk to you seriously." His heart roared in his chest and his mind buzzed with 1,000 questions. He opened his phone and for the first time dared to send her a message. "I'm here. I'm waiting for an answer." The silence dragged on, but he didn't take his eyes off the screen. Every moment turned into a throbbing anxiety. All he had to do was wait and prepare for what was about to happen. For a meeting that would not be avoided either in a taxi or in the sky or back to the past, which no longer exists. The night had fallen like a thick blanket, but only the glimmer of her absence seemed to hang in the room. He got up and went to the window, where the city was twinkling with sporadic lights, like stars that had gone too low. The cold air penetrated my lungs, but I couldn't stop the burning feeling that everything was about to change. His phone rang again, but it wasn't her call. It was an incoming message from an unknown number. She won't be coming back alone. Guesses swirled in my head. He imagined other people's hands touching her, heard the unspoken words. As if on old memory tapes, he replayed their laughter, their tears, and now they shimmered with bitterness. He returned to the bedside table, where her passport was still lying. He opened it with a trembling hand, and suddenly a small envelope fell out among the pages. No identification marks, just his initials. My heart sank. It was her hiding place, her hidden part of life. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a black and white photograph of her laughing with another man at the airport. They're standing at the plane ramp, happy and carefree, and the light in her eyes was the same, but not for him. Suddenly, the lock on the door groaned slightly. She was back. She was standing in the doorway in a bathrobe, her eyes full of surprise and fright. She hadn't expected to see him here, in her city, in her room. He took a step forward, and there was no fury in his gaze, but a fierce determination to find out the whole truth. He handed her the photograph, and she seemed petrified. Her lips tightened, her eyes darkened. She wanted to say something, but her eyes twitched. He took her by the hand and carried her to the light. Pale spots on her wrist, barely noticeable, like fingerprints of anxiety, as if she was trying to erase the traces of the meeting. "Why?" he finally blurted out, but his voice was so low that her heart began to pound in her chest. She turned away, and there was water in her eyes. It seemed to be much more difficult to contain resentment than tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, but her words were like an empty echo in this room. He looked into her eyes and saw fear, not fear of him, but fear of the truth itself. And then he realized her whole life was one big flight. Each flight hid a new secret, and each time she moved away from him, rising higher and higher to forget. He took a slow step toward the door. "I need to know everything," he said harshly, and his hand was already on the handle. She froze, not knowing whether to stop him or let him go. There was a pause between them, in which not only their fate was being decided, but also the meaning of all those flights, all those nights when he returned home, and she flew further away from him. All that could be heard was rapid breathing and the frantic pounding of his heart, which made any sound seem too loud. At that moment, they both knew there was no turning back. Just go ahead, to the open doors and to face the most bitter truth. She stood in the doorway as if stuck between the past and the present. His hand tightened on the doorknob, but he didn't leave. He was waiting for the answer he was afraid to hear. The light from the bedside lamp danced in her eyes, but her voice couldn't find the words. The slight tremor of her shoulders was stronger than any words. He could feel her silence growing, turning into a wall that he was ready to destroy just to find out the truth. In the room outside the window, the air conditioner was thudding, as if measuring the time before the explosion. He took a step forward, almost touching her hand, but suddenly stopped, as if he felt an invisible line between them. She looked down, and in the silence there was only her soft intake of breath. He wanted to shout, accuse, demand explanations, but silence turned out to be stronger than any words. Every second seemed like an eternity. Her tears barely rolling down her cheek, and his clenched fist created a heart-rending tension. Suddenly, she looked up and touched the photos on the table with her fingertip. Her touch was light, but it carried the weight of doubt. Her lips moved slowly, but the words stuck in her throat. He leaned closer, every muscle in his body taut, ready to hang on her every word. At that moment, the whole world seemed to freeze. No unnecessary sounds, just the two of them, and the inevitable choice that had to be made. But she stepped back again, moving away from the table, and the phone in her pocket trembled. The screen lit up with a message, and she snatched it from her belt like a life-saving shield. Wiping away her tears, she pushed the phone away as if unwilling to answer. Once again, silence spread across the room. He looked down at her figure, lost in the semi-darkness, and for the first time realized that in order to find out the truth, he had to wait for her voice. But his own determination might not be enough to bear what she would say. She lowered her eyes and finally spoke softly but clearly. "I met him when you were in the sky, and it seemed to me that you would never land. I was looking for a live voice nearby, not the release of the steering wheel. He was the only one who heard my fears and didn't automatically demand that I return home a hero." His heart was pounding so loudly that he could clearly hear his own thoughts. Betrayal was not about intrigue, but about what he was afraid to admit to himself. He took a step towards her and asked, evenly without shouting, "Why didn't you tell me right away?" Tears froze on her face. I was afraid you'd leave and not come back. I was afraid that you would never be able to be with me because for you, home is not a wall, but a cockpit. And this cockpit is not a place for two people." He listened to her, and everything in his chest was tied into a knot. The answer to all the suspicions of the night and to every sigh that she did in their bed could not be a simple excuse. He exhaled, took a step back, and said, "I get it." She looked up at him. Are you not leaving?" He touched her shoulder and his voice became quiet. "I can't just forget what I saw. But I'm ready to accept that you were confused. I'm ready to fly on, but not everyone is in their own sky together." She smiled through her tears, and he saw the fear of hope light up in her eyes. Suddenly the phone vibrated again. Another message from someone else. But this time she wasn't distracted. She put it in her pocket and said, "Now I answer only to you." In the same second, he realized that betrayal is not a point of no return if both remain close at the moment of confession. He took her hand and led her to the door. A new day was already dawning outside. They walked without turning back to the old hotel, knowing that there was an unknown route ahead, where they would have to learn to trust the wind and each other. And only heaven seemed ready to accept them both. The morning enveloped the city in a gentle light when they left the hotel. The birds had barely begun their chorus and the sky was already anticipating the approaching day. He squeezed her hand a little tighter, not in the familiar gesture of a pilot holding the controls, but like a man who has trusted another for the first time. They walked through the deserted streets, and every step they took was filled with a new meaning. Images from their past replayed in his head, laughter at the airport, quick kisses before takeoff, and those nights when he returned without noticing her tears. Now those memories weren't ghosts, they were a lesson. When they reached a small outdoor cafe near the runway, he stopped and asked for coffee. They sat down at a table on the terrace where the hum of airplanes could be heard. Each new takeoff seemed to them an invitation to start life from scratch. She looked at him with a subtle mixture of relief and excitement, and he smiled for the first time in months without forced confidence. Cups froze in their hands and a real silence was established between them. Not heavy, but smooth, like a cloudless sky. He bent down and whispered, "Let's not pretend. Let's just stay close and look ahead, without promises that we can't keep, without masks." She nodded and smiled calmly for the first time. "I'm afraid, but I want to." At that moment, the bright wing of an airplane flashed over the runway and they looked up. Swirls of clouds grew in the sky, and each new route seemed like a call to freedom, but not alone. He stood up, extended his hand, and helped her up. Together, they headed for the boarding gate, not for the designated flight, but for whatever route they chose together, and let turbulence and fog await them tomorrow. But now they will fly hand in hand, knowing that the most important journey is to return to each other.